world. Happy 4th of July. Patricia, O'Connor, and Frida, Reba, Darcy here today on the Bonsai balcony. It is a bit of a scorcher. There you go. This is a little pap. And that was my partner in crime, Frida. I'm Patricia O'Connor. This is a very warm and toasty bonsai balcony. The last couple, and like I already alluded to, it is the 4th of July, and what a scorcher. Tuesday was in the triple digits all around here. I say all around here because I was not all around here. I was at work where it was triple digits. However, most of the Bay Area by 6 o'clock when I got off work had probably only gotten 3 or 4 degrees cooler from their daily highs at 4 o'clock. And whenever I got home here at 6 o'clock, our temperatures were in the lower 80s, leading me to believe that we may have gotten a reprieve. That is also what I saw when I was looking at how dry my trees were. It's still daylight at 6. It's almost daylight till 9 here. But, it's daylight till almost 9 here. But whenever I look down at my little mames, which are kind of like my canaries in the coal mine, they were just starting to dry out, which told me that they hadn't had an excessively hard day. That was maybe just a little bit, maybe just a tiny bit drier than what I would normally get used to seeing. But it was extremely hot. I bet it got almost 90 up here. Today we're in the mid 80s, which on the ground, which brings us again to almost 90 up here. But the trees so far seem to mostly be taking it in stride and greening up. I was more concerned yesterday. It was warmer than today, but it was also that dry heat. It didn't feel like we lived next to the water. It was a very, very dry heat. And while some places brag about that as a climatary delight, it's a dry heat. It's not as, you don't sweat as much. It doesn't feel so muggy. All of that means to a plant is that the lack of humidity will cause it to exchange its water at a higher rate from its leaves. So dry heat is you want to stand by. And that's kind of what we're doing. Today's show is going to be a little bit, I do this about once a year or so. It's going to be a little bit about watering. This guy's got a little bit left in it. My smaller one is standing by almost full. Everybody got watered early. That's the main thing. On a hot day, you'll get up and you'll see that a lot of your trees will be, more of them will be ready right then when you get ready to go ahead and water. Sometimes you can, you look at that and you think, well, in a couple of hours, more of them will look a little closer to prime, and that'll give us time to do X. So if you're coordinating your day like that, that's kind of a pretty human thing to do. But on really, really hot days, the good idea is to just do your diligence to water a third of them whenever they need watering, because that will allow you to get in there a second time if need be. And that second watering, not overwatering, but that second needed watering can go a long way towards keeping the roots cool. So it's just going to be tips and stuff about watering. These guys take a lot of water early, and on days like today, we need to make up for any other indiscretions. And what I mean is when we water our bonsai, we want to water from the top until we see it coming out of the bottom. That doesn't always mean it percolates through there in real time. So quite a few of these trees have gotten to the point where I'll water them and the water stands there for a second. if I fill up the surface area, first you need to do that because that's what breaks what's called surface tension. I'm going to get off topic here for a second. Surface tension is when your soil dries out from one side of the pot to the other, and the end result is the top layer gets dry and crispy, and it kind of forms a little shell. And when you go to water, sometimes you'll see that the water looks shiny because it's not mixing as quickly or soaking in as quickly to that slightly baked substrate. And it will run over the side of the pot very quickly. And once water starts a path of least resistance where it's cascading over the pot, it'll run out quite quickly, and that water won't always soak in as much as it just ran over the side, kind of a siphon waterfall effect. What you do to break that is put a little bit of water over the entire surface. Tom at Clip and Grow Bonsai for Seniors pointed this out a while back, and just make sure you get a little bit of water all over the surface, and then once you do that, it sort of goes, it breaks that little surface tension breaks down, and then you're able to more readily water your tree, and then make dang sure it's running, the water's going all the way through before you stop. And if it's standing on top, go water another tree and come back when it's soaked up, and do that again until you're sure water is coming all the way out the bottom. It doesn't always do that in real time. I'm not always pouring it on the top and watching it come out of the bottom in real time. This guy, yes. This guy, it pools and puddles, and I have to come back to it. This guy also, and this is also one that is a great example of where the both of those actually are a great example of where that surface tension will cause more water to go over the side of the pot than actually soak up in it. So you have to kind of do your diligence. It doesn't take a whole lot of water either to fill up that top area, and then after that, if it doesn't soak it up fast enough, or if it has that baked sheen on top of it, it doesn't soak it up fast enough at all, then it's more likely to just go over the side. So that's one tip. On days where we have extreme scorchers, I have heard of people, that was our camera knock. I have heard of people taking foil and putting around the base of their trees, around the pot, and around the top of the surface. This does two things. It reflects the light off. It's dangerous because of where it bounces it. But the plus that it does is it keeps the clay pot or the ceramic pot from soaking up all of that direct sunlight heat, and it does the same for the surface of the pot, which helps to keep the roots cooler. In other words, you're shading this area, but you're also bouncing light. And where are you bouncing light? Seemingly straight up. And if you take these tips and were to turn them upside down with wire for some static effect, not only would you be changing the energy, but another thing that would happen quickly is before the thing had a chance to reorient. Yeah, okay, we'll go with that. Before it had a chance to settle, it would get sunburned from getting light where the sun don't shine. That's what happens. That's what happens to needles. That's what happens to leaves. That's what happens to peoples and animals. If they're not used to getting UV somewhere and then they get exposed to it, it cooks them. So I would be worried about the reflective qualities of that happening. And luckily for me, I always have a few old black t-shirts around. Not only can you drape that around the pot to keep the pot from, if it's 100 degrees out, if it's triple digits, then this surface is that. But this pot, with one side of it sitting there in direct sun, is getting hotter and hotter and hotter than that. And if times a big tree, we're not as likely to see the ill effects if an inch or two from the edge of the pot, those roots were to die back because they were exposed to something that was 100-degree ceramic plate, basically. Whereas these guys, I've spoken in past about, they have a little hedge for, we put them in this tray of substrate so that if they want to do an escape route, they can, and that escape route will keep them hanging in there. That's their hedge against high heat. That also, when we water everything, this substrate stays wetter longer and helps to keep those pots cooler longer. The smaller the pot, the higher the degree of trouble that the tree would be in, because that small little piece of ceramic pot is going to soak up a lot of heat. So when it comes time to do my work on my trees, sometimes we look up those and we see where they've got a good bit of root growth, escape roots going. And while we don't want to let those clog the drain holes, I wouldn't go cutting those back on my pines, on my Mame pines right now. This is when that little trick will save them the most. I just, as opposed, we just did a wire removal and a little bit of cleanup to this literati pine a few days ago, and I went through and cleaned. It had quite a bit of escape roots, and I just cleaned all of those back, so it's the bottom of its pot is now fresh and clean. But that was its hedge against this high heat that we're just now rolling into. I don't think it's as susceptible to that as some of the others, but I do have signs of where we've been through that before. A lot of times you can see some bands. Now, bands can be needle cast and all kind of other stuff, but a lot of times what people panic over being needle cast turns out to not be. One thing that will cause needles to change colors is high heat. That can be heat damage. So yeah, everybody got a good water early, and now we're standing by waiting for more. It's the 4th of July. The pool is absolutely rocking. It sounds like the kids are having a pretty good time. Make sure. Yeah, I'm kind of doing this a little spastic this way, but yeah. And then that's a few of those tips. Like today I was watching Steve's Backyard Bonsai, and a video he did last week, he was cleaning up some, what was it? English holly or something? But I think those are oaks. And he was cleaning up the roots from underneath. One, he lives in New York. It's probably not a trillion degrees there. But and two, the trees, which were really cool looking, by the way. Y'all should check out Steve's Backyard Bonsai. They were, I think if I recall, they were English holly, English yopon, whatever. But they're in the oak family. They're not going to be that freaked out about heat. Plus, they were show hand size, and they really looked pretty cool. They're coming along nicely. That was a good pruning show, and it's probably a time for me to do a little bit of pruning back too. But I just thought today would be a good time to do a couple of little watering tips, and those tips, as we mentioned, were to repeat. Water early on your hot days. Get out there and do it early. That way, if you get a chance to do it again, you can if need be. Use something to take the pot out of direct heat on your smaller trees. Allow your smaller trees to have escape roots in substrate, which will be a hedge against having their feet escape through the bottom of the pot and be in some cool, moist substrate. Will be a hedge against their dying of heat. Later in the years, we get closer to fall, you want to start making sure that substrate starts drying out so that they're not just sitting in water all the time. But in the summer, that tray dries out about just a little bit after the pots do, so it works out. Let's see. Bring susceptible trees in from direct sunlight. If you can put them in the shade, put them in the shade. If you can, like I've done in the past, put them on a table next to the patio door. Leave the patio door open because there's no AC in here. Also, AC is not good for them. It's not something that necessarily helps them. It would dry them out, which is what's bad for them about being inside. So being inside or close to the window or the door with the window open but out of direct sunlight. What we're basically talking about is being out of direct sunlight. Fans, they don't really do much for plants as far as heat exchange. They do make the roots stronger. The rocking tends to make roots stronger. The movement of air around them increases the amount of CO2 around them, and that once they breathe up the CO2 around them, if a breeze comes along and exchanges that air, then they've got another batch to go through. Other than that, fans on trees don't cool them. You're just taking 90-degree air and giving it to them at 15 miles an hour. Whereas humans are actually hotter than the ambient temperature even when it's hot. The hotter it is, the less ability we have to move that 110 degrees we are inside ourselves. So a fan moving our own personal heat off of us is why fans feel good. Not so much if you're a plant and your basic core temperature would be like 4 degrees or something. You don't make a lot of heat by being a plant. So those are tips and more than you ever wanted to know about fans and plants. Watering tips. Also, another thing you might consider on a day like today, say you have a few trees and you're worried about it and you're gonna, you could set up a wick system. A wick system could be just as easy as a piece of cotton line in a jar of water that's inside of a bowl that has the other end of our cotton line encircling here, and you don't hardly really see anything, but if you lift it up, you would see that it's always going to be wet underneath that cotton line where it's siphoning straight down. In theory, straight into any root that might be on the waiting, receiving end of that, and since pines can move water up, down, sideways, and backwards, conifers can do that. That is another good little, just something else you can do. People have often discussed about, and I've mentioned in the past about submerging the bases of trees. Like if you water and it's 1,000,000 degrees and you come in from work and it seems like everything's been wet a long time or it's wilted a long time, you might be tempted to put some water in the bathtub and start collecting trees and setting them in there for a second, and then collecting the first ones you put in there and taking them out after they soaked that up and replacing them with others as some sort of emergency cool down. I've heard of people doing that, and I would say that's probably if you're back and your calorie intake is up for that, okay, fine. But when it comes to good watering, it wouldn't be a good. I'm not a big fan of hydroponic systems that float water up. I don't think having water come up from the bottom through the drain holes up to the surface is necessarily a good thing. Whenever we water a tree, the water tries to work its way in between the particles, and as it does, it creates a pathway of least resistance. That pathway of least resistance over time may grow a little bit with a little bit of sediment being moved along, but it also will get tighter as the roots grow and expand and start trying to fill any and all gaps. And that little balance back and forth is helps us to keep water percolating from top where it gets watered down through the bottom. And as your pot goes from solid wet to water running out of the bottom. As the water runs out of the bottom, so too does this pot full of water begin to run down. And as it does, air, tiny little air molecules could get stopped by tiny little passages that aren't quite big enough for them to squeeze in between. Except this water level going down pulls a vacuum, pulling in any tightly fitting air, and that so as the water level goes down, the air goes down, and that percolation is good for bonsai. It's good for mycorrhiza. Everything knows which way it's going. Everything runs in the right direction. Your pathways of least resistance are kind of like organic, or kind of like an organic vascular system. And whatever little stuff you have going on below the surface that's living or bacterial or anything like that is playing right into that. And when you water from the bottom up, it's kind of like taking bulldozers up the wrong way down a very narrow street. It's just everybody's looking the wrong way. Everything gets kind of uprooted or left out or whatever. And I'm saying as a heat practice on the whole, it's not something I would discourage as far as stopping heat. But as far as hooking up plants and drip trays that fill up for 10 minutes and then flush all the water down, I wouldn't necessarily be a big fan of that on anything but perennials. The guys that do that hydroponic stuff, they're growing in something that's usually very, very rocky anyway. So they're not really as concerned about their percolation, and their plants don't last as long. We want to keep fine, healthy, happy roots, and we want to try to give them a hedge against cooking. Those are some of my watering tips, things to think about on an extremely, extremely hot day. Like and subscribe if you guys have not already. Our next drop will be probably we get closer to the weekend. We'll do something on maybe we'll do something Friday night. If not, we typically do something on Saturday. And Saturday night live bonsai will be coming up, and that's always interesting. I'll try not to get such a late start. Last time I started about 9 o'clock. That was a bit late for me. We'll do better. I appreciate you. Frida appreciates you. And thank you so much for watching. Happy holiday.